I'm going to cover some basic web writing techniques using a content management system. Now, for this screencast, I'm going to use WordPress, but the same principles can be applied whether you're using Tumblr or Blogger or some other content management systems. Pretty much most of them offer the same options, the same functionality, and the same principles still apply. If you can't find out how to do these things on another content management system, then simply search for that technique and the name of that system and you should find some help files. Now, I'm not going to cover setting up an account on WordPress because you can find plenty of resources elsewhere. In fact, there's this video on WordPress.tv, which is recommended if you haven't already signed up for WordPress.com and need some guidance to do so. But I'm going to assume you've set up an account on WordPress, you've created a website, and you want to start creating a new post. Now, when you do that, you can do that on the left-hand side under the Posts menu and click Add New, or you can do it at the top here and click New Post from there. And you'll get a screen like this. You have a box for your headline, a box for the article, and there are some other boxes around here which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. But the first thing you're probably going to look at is the headline. Now, actually, this is probably not the first thing you will write because it's much easier to write a headline after you've written the story. But I do want to cover some key principles around writing headlines for the web. And the first principle is you should obviously write literally. You should make sure that your headline contains the key words that relate to this article. So if you're writing a match report, for example, you might say, you know, Hammers win against Latics, okay? Or even worse, football match report. Now, with either of those headlines, you've got to think about what people are going to be searching for if they're interested in this content. And the other content on the web that might be out there as well. So if someone's interested in West Ham's game against Wigan, they're not going to be searching for football match reports, and they're probably not going to be searching for Hammers or Latics. They're going to be searching for West Ham, they're going to be searching for Wigan, and they might be searching for the names of particular players if they've had a prominent role. So if one particular West Ham player, let's say Kevin Nolan, has scored a hat-trick, then that should probably be in your headline as well. So avoid puns online. Make sure that your headline contains the literal phrases, the names, the organisations, the key concepts that relate to your article, and that will make it much easier for people to find. So in this instance, you might have Kevin Nolan scores hat-trick as West Ham beat Wigan. That's got West Ham in it, it's got Wigan, it's got Kevin Nolan, it's even got hat-trick, which people might be searching for. So try and make sure that your URL, your headline rather, contains those key phrases. And related to that, once you've typed a headline, you'll notice that underneath this permalink here contains a little yellow area which relates to your headline. If you click on the edit button next to that, you can change this. So if you want to change this to Kevin Nolan West Ham Wigan, you can do it there. And it's worth looking at that URL that WordPress automatically generates and customizing that. If you're happy with it, click OK. You can always change this later. And now we move on to the article itself. Now, many of the same principles apply to the article and the content of the article. Again, you want to make sure it's easy for people to find, that objects are named, that key elements are mentioned and not merely alluded to. So your first line, like any news report, should be short and to the point. It should include the new things that make this news. They should include the most important things. So we might have something like, you know, West Ham went clear of the relegation zone, and so on, okay, as your introductory angle, as Kevin Nolan scored his first hat-trick of the season. So that's the new thing about this article. Now you'll add more and more paragraphs, or more background, a quote perhaps, some colour. And as it gets longer and longer, you will probably want to break it up with subheadings. People don't necessarily read from top to bottom online. In fact, they don't necessarily read from top to bottom in print either. So you want to make it easier to signpost what different parts of the article are about by adding subheadings to break it up, to make it easier to navigate. And also this will give clues to search engines, more clues about what's in your text. So after you've written 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, depending how long the paragraphs are, you might want to add a subheading, particularly if you're shifting focus or subject. So let's say fans protest was part of this. So fans protested. Then you would make that a subheading by using this menu here. Now if you can't see this menu on your WordPress window, then it might be because this menu here is hidden. In that case, you want to click this button, which is called the kitchen sink button. If you click it once, it will hide that row. Click it again, and this second row of options appears. So just make sure that that is pressed and you have 2 rows of menu options. Once you've got that there, select the text you want to make into a subheading, and then on this paragraph drop-down menu, select heading 2. Now, there are 6 levels of headings. Heading 1 is the most important. That's normally used for headlines and page titles. Heading 2 is the second most important, and so on down through heading 3, heading 4. So because this is a subheading, it's not quite as important as our heading, then we're going to make it heading 2 rather than heading 1 or heading 3. That subheading is similarly also a sort of headline. So the same sorts of principles apply to your subheading. You want your subheading to also contain key terms, to be very concrete and specific about what it's talking about. So you might say West Ham fans, for example, or you might say, let's say what they're protesting about, you know, protest against board or lack of signings. These are all going to help in terms of telling search engines what this content is about. You might at this point want to be a bit more colloquial and maybe use nicknames. It's really a decision about the tone of the piece, about the style that you're using, and also about, again, search engines. Is hammers likely to be another search term that you want to think about? Another thing you might want to think about to make it even more scannable is making key names, terms, issues bold. So Kevin Nolan here is a key figure. I might want to make that bold just the first time that I mention it. I don't want to make Kevin Nolan bold every time. I'm basically saying here's a new character in this story. And making it bold just makes it easier to pick out with the eye, and if the reader is specifically interested in Kevin Nolan, that's what they're going to pick out and read about, and then maybe move on to the rest of the piece. Likewise, quotes should be turned into block quotes if they're at all long. So if it's a short quote, you know, Kevin said it was great, then you're not going to need to indent that. But if you have a much longer quote, let's say, it was great, the fans were fantastic, the manager is inspirational, I am on a high, etc. Then select again the passage and click this button, the block quote button, and it will just indent it, and depending on the template that you are using for your blog, it will also style it in different ways. Different themes in blogs will style block quotes in different ways. But just selecting it like that makes a significant difference. Not only does it indent and sometimes format the quote, but often readers are looking for quotes. Often the quotes are the one thing that sets your report aside from another report on the same event. Everyone has seen the same things, but they might have gotten different quotes from different interviews, different sources. So make sure that they stand out by using the block quote option. Another way to make things stand out is to use links. Now, links are an absolutely fundamental element of online journalism, and if you're writing a piece of content on the web and not using links, then you should be seriously thinking about why. You really aren't doing very good online journalism if you can't link to any background, unless it's so incredibly original that all of the information is in this article. It's likely that you will need to link to something elsewhere. So in this case, we've got the first hat-trick of the season. Well, we could link that to some statistics on previous hat-tricks. Actually, if it was his second, that is more likely to link to some background. So again, select the text, and this time click on the link icon. That will bring up a link box, and you can type in, or more likely paste, the address of the article that you're linking to. So let's say there was an article which had a URL like that. Then that's how you would do it. Pasting the URL is much better than obviously typing it. Also, make sure that the HTTP bit of the URL is still there. There are two common mistakes here. The first is to have a URL like that. It won't work. The second is sometimes people come into this window, they put the cursor there and they paste the URL, but there's also this HTTP bit still there. So make sure you just select all and paste, or delete the HTTP bit first. But the key thing is your URL should start with HTTP and it shouldn't have that twice. So add the link and you'll get your text underlined. Now, as I said, links are not only important in online journalism, but also, again, they provide an element of scannability. People are looking for names, they're looking for quotes, and they're looking for links, so they might want to follow that up. They're also using it as a way to judge the quality of your material. Other things to consider online include the fact that when you get to the end of the article, you might want to think about what's missing or what's next. In traditional writing, you try and wrap up the story and make it self-contained, but obviously online this article might be updated. There might be questions that are still open that you want people to contribute to. So think about whether there's some sort of call to action or next step at the end of this piece. In a match report, it's not necessarily likely, but here are some examples there might be. So, were you at the match? Did you see any trouble or violence? You know, if there was any difficulties. So you might want to add that, perhaps italicize it, perhaps make it bold. Let us know in the comments below or on Twitter at whatever your name is. That's one call to action. Another one might be, do you know anything about this particular thing, this particular problem, or there's a gap in the report? Do you work at, and so on. Can you add anything else? So don't necessarily just end your article thinking that's the end of the interaction. Think about what people might want to do next, or what they can do next, how you can continue to engage with that audience, because there might be new additions. So you could write, we'll be adding to this report as events develop, or we'll be adding updates on Twitter at our name as events develop. Obviously you'd want to link that to a particular Twitter account. or we'll be continuing to report. Subscribe for updates. Okay, so think about that ongoing interaction. Those are just some options in terms of the actual content itself. The other key element is these things on the right. And I'll go from the bottom upwards. So first of all, we have categories here down at the bottom. Categories should be broad areas that your site covers. What those will be will depend on your particular site. So if it's a general news website, then the category here might be sport. Okay, but if it's a sports website, the category might be Premiership or football or even West Ham. Now, in the case of West Ham, you might have West Ham and obviously Wigan. So it really depends on how specific your site is. For the purposes of this, I'm going to say this is actually just a general news website, and Wigan and West Ham are not going to appear often enough to be justified as categories. Instead, now we're moving on to tags. Now, tags are more specific organisations, people, concepts that are mentioned in your piece. So you certainly want any names. So Kevin Nolan is definitely going to be a tag for this article. The teams are going to be tags in this article. Protest is a key theme in this article, and so on. So make sure you tag your article effectively with any key themes, key names, key organisations involved. This again really helps search engines understand what your content is about. And then finally at the top, you've got the area where you publish your post. Now normally you'll just click publish, but if this content isn't time sensitive, it doesn't have to go out right now, then you might want to schedule the post. So instead of publishing immediately, you can click edit and say, well actually 10:52 in the morning is a pretty rubbish time to be publishing. I'm going to try and catch maybe people as they start their lunch break, or maybe people as they start to end their lunch break, or as they start to travel home, or in the evening. It really depends on your audience and what time you think they're going to be looking for this content on your platform, on the web. This will differ on a website to, for example, what time you might put it on Facebook or on Twitter. So think about timing and schedule your post if you want to. I'm going to say this is a lunchtime read, so I'll click OK. And then instead of publish, you now have a button to schedule. So you can click that and it will go live at that particular point. That's all I really want to cover in terms of the things that you should be using in WordPress and in a content management system. You can obviously add media and you should probably think about images, but I'm going to cover that elsewhere in the course.